When I posted this video, the most requested was how to make the flip-top mittens using your Sentro circular knitting machine. So I've compiled all the different parts of the tutorials that I originally had and made it all into one video, and also added a different option for the thumb. There's going to be two options. You can either make the thumb using a 22 needle circular knitting machine, or you can crochet a thumb, and I will show you step by step how to do either option. A few things you need to know to make the mittens is you need to know how to do the standard cast on method, the waste yarn cast on and cast off method, as well as how to mattress stitch. I have linked in the video description below of this video my full step-by-step tutorials on how to do all of these, so you can take a look if you are not familiar with how to do them. And then the yarn that I am using in this video is the Caron Simply Soft Party in gray color. So let's get going on making our mittens. To get started, I'm going to cast on, starting at the white needle, over and under each needle one time around using waste yarn that's a contrasting color to my project yarn. Then I will do between 5 and 7 rows of the waste yarn and put it in the middle. Next, we'll take our project yarn and leave a long tail out at the end, and we are going to do 30 rows, and this is to make the body of our mittens. Lastly, follow up with some more waste yarn, making 5 to 7 rows, and I let it run out, and after a couple cranks around, it will fall off the machine. Now we're going to make the finger cap. We're going to cast on over and under one time around, and then I did 20 rows. And so this is kind of like making a beanie cap. Once you get 20 rows, you're going to follow it up with a waste yarn again, and you want it to be a contrasting color in a similar weight to your project yarn. And again, do between 5, 7 rows, whatever you have available. Once you can let the yarn run out, and then a couple cranks around, it will fall off the machine, or you can cut the yarn and then do a couple cranks around and let it fall off your machine. Now to put the finger cap together, the side that was casted on, it's like a drawstring, so we just need to cinch that closed. On the other side, we want to close the tube with our waste yarn. So we're going to take the first row of our project yarn, which is the gray yarn right next to the waste yarn color. Count 24 needles or 24 stitches on each side because there's a total of 48 needles on your machine. Once you get both of those, put each one of the 24 stitches on your crochet hook and slip stitch them together, going back and forth to each side, closing your tube. I have a full tutorial on waste yarn and how to close your tube in my beginner's guide collection, so check that out if you'd like to see it in a slower real time how to do this. And we're going to slip stitch it back and forth all the way down to the bottom. Once we get to the bottom and only have one loop left on the hook, you will take the end of your project yarn, slip it through the loop to secure the stitches. And what this is doing is securing the live stitches for when we remove the waste yarn. Once they're secured, then the project will not unravel. Now we're getting down to the end, and sometimes there's a couple stitches that are hiding in there. So just take your time and look to make sure you pick up all the live stitches. There's always one hiding, which, sorry, it went off of the screen there. Secure it. Now we can just remove our waste yarn because this was the cast off. You could just pull the end and it will fall off. Next, where we did the drawstring, you just sew it down a little bit back and forth. And then I put it down through that end, and we are going to mattress stitch it closed again. So we're going to fold it once again. So to mattress stitch, you're going in between the two little V's on either side. And I'll try to show where that is. And you'll just go back and forth all the way down. And I was just trying to find the easiest way to show you and the most comfortable way to sew it. And by doing a mattress stitch, once you pull it close, you won't be able to see the yarn that you're using to stitch with, and it will kind of look invisible where you can't see where you close the tube together. So almost make it look like it was one piece, even though it's not. And sometimes if you pick up the wrong part of the stitch doing the mattress stitch, you'll see kind of a line where it doesn't come together. The pattern isn't correct. It pulls two sides together and it doesn't look horrible, but I just take it out and then try the different part of your V so you can see the pattern looks complete and then you can't quite see where your stitches are. And so you're just going to do this all the way down to close it into place. And you do this in between the little V of your stitches and you pick up that middle piece of yarn. Here's just a close-up in real time so you can see where that's at. And we're going to do this all the way down to the bottom. Once we get to the bottom, we want to close it together, and I just do a couple stitches back and forth at the bottom, and then I knot it to secure, and we're going to leave out the end for right now. So just do a couple stitches back and forth, and then make a knot. So there's how it's going to look on your hand, the cap part of your mitten. And then I just knot the two project ends together to secure. Now we're going to do the body of the mitten. And this is the same thing like the bottom of the finger cap. We are just going to slip stitch the tube closed on both ends. Again, we count 24 stitches on either side, and it's the first row of your project yarn, which is the gray one on here that's sandwiched in between those two yellow pieces of yarn. That's your waist yarn. And take your crochet hook, and we're just going to slip stitch them back and forth all the way down. So this is just like if you watched my fingerless glove tutorial. That's exactly what we're making here, but then we'll be adding that cap, finger cap, and then also a thumb. And then also what I did on here too is I'm going to show you how you can make a thumb also using a 22 circular knitting machine. If you did my other mitten tutorial, I crocheted the thumb. This one I'm going to use the knitting machine because I had some comments where people said they don't crochet and weren't wanting to learn how to crochet. So here's an option you can also do with the knitting machine. So that will be coming up in the tutorial. Once you closed it down, you're going to remove your waist yarn. And then on the other side, we're going to do the exact same thing. Just close down your tube. Make sure you start at the same point so your project isn't twisted. So that's why I always have the end tail of my waist yarn and the tail end of my project at the bottom. And then I count those stitches on either side just to make sure I'm even. That's my reference point that I feel like works for me, so it's not off. Once that's all completed, then we're going to remove our waist yarn again. Now that's done, we're going to fold it in half. And then we're going to do the same thing. We're going to mattress stitch up along the side of our mitten to make the body of it. And then you just want to every now and then put it on your hand to see about where you want your thumb hole. And what I would do is, as I was mattress stitching, I would put it on so you could see where your thumb hole was. And then I'd also put on the finger caps to kind of gauge where I wanted to stop to make the hole for the thumb, and then continue mattress stitching up. So there's the mattress stitch starting to look pretty good. And for the thumb hole, it's about 15 or 16 stitches up is where I stop to then skip 6 stitches to make the hole for the thumb. And the hole for your thumb, we want to, I like skipping 6 stitches on one side and then count over 6 stitches as well on the other side. When I get to the 6th one, I pull the yarn through, making our hole, and then continue mattress stitching up all the way to the top. And then I sew it to close the tube together, making another knot. And I use the 2 project end tails and I knot it down to secure it in place. And there you go. There's the 2 pieces together. So next we're going to start sewing our mitten. Welcome back to part 2 of our flip top convertible mittens. Just a few notes before we get going. So just a note on handing. It's not going to matter as much when you make your first mitten, but when you make your second mitten, you want to make sure you're sewing things correctly so you get a left hand, or this is my right hand, if you get a right hand and then a left hand, because if you sew them the exact same way, you're going to have your hole on the top of your hand, which is what you don't want. So just some information before we move on. You want to decide what's going to be your outside and what's going to be your inside. Even though they look identical, just decide. Because what we do, and you will see if I turn this inside out, okay, because I have the ugly stitches on the inside, right? Or correct, I should say. So this is now the inside where our hand is. We're taking this part and we're going to make this be our outside, and this is our inside. So we have right sides or outsides together, and we push it down in there. So we have right sides together, and then we're going to whip stitch our seam halfway around. So we're leaving an opening. So if we have our thumb facing the right, our thumb hole facing the right, and we whip stitch the half closest to us, this is going to make, once we put it back right side out, a right-handed glove. Okay, so now if we want to make a left-handed glove, again, put it inside out. Now we're inside out, wrong side out. We want to put the right sides together of our finger cap. And now our thumb hole is to the left when facing us. We want to again stitch the closest part to us together and leave this half open to create a left-handed glove. I hope that makes sense and helps you just with handing. The first one, not a big deal, but when you go to make your second one, you want to make sure you do it opposite so you have handing, because you don't want to, if you make them both the same way, then you're going to have the opening on your top of your hand, and that's not what you want. So now to sew our finger cap to our main body of our mitten, again, you want the main part to be your inside facing you at this moment, and then we're going to put in our mitten cap inside it so it's right sides facing together. And then we're just going to take some of those in-tail yarns that are left, and we're going to slip stitch through both pieces halfway around to make our mitten so it can do the flip top. And just hopefully I explained that okay, that we have our main body of our mitten. Right now it's inside out. The right side is on the inside, and then we have the right side of our finger cap. They're touching, so right sides together. And they are kind of identical, but maybe if you had like a flaw in the yarn or something like that, you could just like decide what you want your inside and outside to be. If you're just like, oh, that's kind of like something going on you don't like, that would kind of just be the main reason why you'd want to choose inside and outside. And so we're making a right-handed glove here. So I have my thumb hole when I'm looking at it to the right, and then I am sewing the part closest to me halfway around. If you're wanting to do a left hand, you want the finger hole to be facing the left when you're looking at the project, and then again, sew halfway around closest towards you. So this is a right hand. And then you can just check it to make sure you have it sewn the way you want. And then you can knot to secure those end little tail yarns And then I felt like it needed to go a little bit more how I want it. So just doing a couple more stitches, then you knot to secure, weave in your ends, and you can cut off any extra that you have. And then also when I was doing the stitches, I tried doing like 2 whip stitches per stitch when I was closing it, just because this is going to be like a hinge, so you want it really secure. And then I'm just now weaving in the other little tails. So next we're going to make our thumb. To make the optional thumb by crocheting it for your mitten, take yarn with the tail end towards you, hold it between your thumb and pointer finger and wrap it around to make an X, and then put your crochet hook under and pull under and twist around your yarn, and then yarn over and pull through again to make your first loop. And there's your magic circle. Now we're going to do 12 single crochets in your magic circle. And so we're going to go under the loop, yarn over, you have 2 loops on your crochet hook, pull through 2. Go under the loop, pull up, yarn over, pull through 2. And we're going to do this 12 times around. And this was for my thumb. If you have making a glove for a thicker thumb, you might need to do a few more. If you're doing it for a smaller thumb, you might need to do a few less. So that you might have to play with, but this seemed to be about right for me. Once you get 12 of them on your circle, now we're going to pull the tail end of our yarn to close our circle. And then to join, we're just going to slip stitch through our first single crochet and our last loop, and then we're going to chain 1. And then I put a stitch marker right where my chain 1 is, because that is the beginning of our rows, and so this is you can keep track of how many rows you do, and you can move up that stitch marker. So now what we're going to do is I turn the work over, and we are going to do 12 single crochets going all the way around again. We're not going to be adding anymore because we want to work it up to make it in a round for our thumb. So this is kind of like if you've ever crocheted a basket. We want to kind of make a tube. So we're just going to keep working 12 single crochets in the round, and when we get back to our start, we're just going to keep doing 12 more single crochets, and I just move my stitch marker up so I know where my beginning is for each row. And now we're back to our starting point, and then we're going to just start over making 12 single crochets. So that's our crochet 1 and now 2, and we're going to work this around and around until you get the length of your thumb that you would like. And so then I'll speed this up a little bit as we're continuing to work in the round. Again, once you get back to your stitch marker, you just continue working your single crochet. You don't do any chains. You just keep doing 12. And then here it is after a little bit of a few rows, so you can see what it starts to look like. It should start looking like a little pot. And I'm just moving my stitch marker up. And then you can see it kind of forming the shape and the tip of the thumb, and kind of close our magic circle a little bit so you can see that. And then this is how I was measuring it to see how many stitches or single crochets I would want for my thumb, and that's why that 12 seemed to work really well. in the beginning and continuing the 12 all the way up. So this is what you can do as well when you're making your thumb. So now we're going to just continue up because I like the shape that it's taking place until you get to the length that you need. And so here was my last one that I finished, my last row. And you just join the row with a slip stitch. And here's how it's going to look. And then you can just make sure that's about how long you want the thumb. And I did 13 rows. And then here to join, we're just going to do a slip stitch in our first single crochet, you could say. So I just go through that one and then I pull through. And then you can cut off the end of your yarn. You want to leave a long tail. And then this is how you are going to join the thumb to your mitten. You do it the exact same way as in the tutorial as I did the knitted thumb on the 22 needle machine. You're just going to whip stitch it the same way. And so there is your thumb if you would like to crochet one. For the top of your thumb where the magic circle was, you just want to knot that. You close it real tight and then do a few knots, and then you can weave in your ends as well. Second option is to make your thumb using the 22 needle circular knitting machine. So here is that tutorial. So we're going to cast on over and under each needle one time around. And then we put it in our yarn holder, in our tension, and then we're going to do 12 rows for our thumb. That seemed to be about the right length. And for these rows, these are for about my hand. If you have longer fingers than mine, longer hands, you might want to do some additional rows. Or if you have smaller hands, you can do less rows. So once we get our 12 rows, now we want our waste yarn. And I like doing the 5 to 7 rows, but this one I didn't want to cut. I reuse this waste yarn over and over again. So I do quite a few rows and I just let it run out. And then you do 2 cranks around the machine, and it will, once your yarn runs out, crank one time around, then one time around again, and it will just fall off the machine. So that's what we're doing here. And then we're going to follow the same steps like we did with the finger cap. We are going to cinch close the top. It makes that drawstring effect. And then this bottom part where the waste yarn is, we are going to slip stitch it closed. So here I am just playing. You can see it's about the right size for my thumb. So cinch that part closed. And I have that extra tail end. You want a little bit of extra so you can mattress stitch it down. And then here we're just going to count 11 stitches. So you have 11 project stitches is that first row of gray in between that yellow, because this is a 22 needle machine. So you get both the 11 stitches on either side, and then we're going to slip stitch them closed. Again, I put the tails of the waste yarn and the project yarn in the middle and the bottom, and that kind of keeps me even. And we slip stitch these all the way down. And then once we get one last loop that's on our hook, we pull the project yarn through to secure them down. And then just make sure that you pick up each of these live stitches. Once you get down closer to the tail end of the working yarn, they can kind of hide in there. So just check to make sure you're not missing one. And see that, oh, there was one more right there. So I'm just picking it up. And now putting in my tail of my project yarn. Now the waste yarn can be removed because we have secured all those live stitches and we made a really nice finished edge. Once our waste yarn is removed, now we're going to mattress stitch down just like we did our finger cap. So we fold it in half again and then get a needle, and we are going to mattress stitch down, and then this is how we secure in both ends to our mitten. So now to mattress stitch down our thumb in the round, so it's the correct size. We're going to take our darning needle, and at the top we're going to use our excess tail that we use for the cast on, and we're going to start on the opposite side where we cinched it together. to start our mattress stitch because we need to start at the top and work our way down. So we go back and forth to each side of the row, picking up again that same horizontal bar stitch that's at the point of the V stitch on both sides. And so mattress stitch it all the way down to make it a smaller tube. And what's also nice is this makes your thumb a double layer as well, so it's nice and insulated just like the mitten. So I'll speed this up, and again, I always check my work after doing a few stitches. If you skipped a stitch, or if you started picking up stitches from a different row, you'll start seeing that twisting, or you could have a hole. So always check before you tie down and weave in your ends. Always check, because it's really easy to undo the mattress stitch if you do need to redo it. So now my mattress stitch is done. We've gotten all that together, so I'm just going to now tie a knot to make sure everything is closed and secured. And that's how we make the thumb using the 22 needle circular knitting machine. So now let's attach our thumb to our mitten. To attach the thumb to the mitten, the first thing we need to do is take our mitten and flip it inside out so the inside of the mitten is facing you. And then decide for your thumb, what you want to be the outside of your thumb. And you keep the thumb right side facing out. And then insert the thumb into the thumb hole of your mitten. And now we're going to use the tail ends of the thumb, and we are going to whip stitch the thumb into place on our mitten body. So that's why you want to have the body of your mitten facing inside out, because we want the whip stitch, which is, considered the ugly stitch. We want that on the inside so we can't see it once we flip the mitten back right side out. So I just like using the tail ends of my yarn that was from my thumb, and then I get my darning needle, and then I go through the first stitch of my thumb and then the first stitch of the knit stitch of my mitten where that hole was that we made for the thumb. And I like to do 2 whip stitches per stitch, and we should have a total of about 12 stitches all the way around. Now I had 2 tail ends of my thumb yarn, so I've just picked up one and I'm going all the way around. It ended up being kind of short, so then I had to go back and use the other tail end I still had attached to whip stitch it completely on. But if you have a long enough tail, you can just use one going all the way around. And then here's just a little bit of close-up of those whip stitches. I just make sure I take the first stitch at the base of my thumb and then go through the first stitch on the mitten of my thumb hole. And then before you tie your ends together, your tail ends of your yarn, your excess, before you tie them down and you weave in your ends, put the mitten on your hand just to make sure you don't have any holes, you didn't skip any stitches. So I've whip stitched it all the way around, so now I'm going to take my mitten, turn it back right side out, and put it on my hand to make sure everything is secured into place and I don't have any holes, I didn't skip any stitches. Once it all looks good, now I can tie those ends together for my mitten. And I tie between 3-4 knots to secure it, and then I weave in the ends, and then I like to hide the tail ends of the yarn in between the 2 layers of the mitten hand, and then just cut off any excess. And so here it is. Now your mitten is complete. The last thing you can do is you can add on an optional button to the mitten to hold down the cap of the fingers. And so I just took extra yarn I had of the same yarn. I tied a knot, and then I'm going to braid this together to create like a rope to attach to the end of my beanie cap for a button loop. So I tied a knot, and then we're going to insert it from the inside through the top of our mitten cap. Now that those are attached, it'll make it a little bit easier to braid these. And I do a nice tight braid to create like a little rope. And then it just takes a minute to braid it down, and I try to do it as tight as possible. So it's kind of tiny, so it takes just a second. Once I have it braided, I'm going to take the tail ends put them on my needle, and I'm going to put them back through to the inside of the beanie cap, and this creates the loop. And then once I have those back down in there, you just kind of adjust it a little bit, and now we can tie the two ends together. And I'm taking the tail ends and I'm feeding them through where my knot was just to secure it, and then I tie each of the tail ends together. And now I just tie each tail end together with multiple knots so they don't come out. So once I get those attached, now we're going to tie them together. I should have left a little bit extra long tail on the initial knot side that I did, so it make it a little bit easier, but I managed. So if you have a little bit longer leftover yarn, make them a little bit longer, and then you can hide the excess tails in between the two layers of the finger cap and cut off any extra. Now we're going to take our button that we have, and I'm going to use some extra yarn. I have a metal large eye needle that I'm able to feed the yarn through, and then I kind of just line up where the button hole is to where I want to attach my button. So I kind of put it on my hand, and then I line up about where I want that button so I can attach the finger cap when needed. And then I just sew down the button like normal with the needle. And I'll sew it down into place and then knot the ends on the inside of. And depending on how thick of yarn you have, I like using the yarn so then it all matches, but you could also use a needle and thread if you wanted to do that as well. So now that your mitten's complete, you need to make the left hand, and then this is going to show how to sew together your left hand. You want the thumb of the mitten to be facing the left side, and then insert your finger cap into the mitten, and we're going to whip stitch the part closest to you. So the first thing I do is I take the tail ends from our mitten body and the finger cap, and I'm going to knot them together just to secure them into place. And then a trick you can do is just take some of your stitch markers and pin the cap to the body, put it back right side out, and then put it on your hand to make sure where those stitch markers are, that's where we're going to whip stitch it, just so you don't whip stitch it the incorrect way and make another right-handed mitten. And so then I'm just going to do the same thing. We're going to whip stitch the two pieces together, going through the top stitches of both layers. Before I secure any of the excess tail ends of the yarn, just make sure you didn't skip anything, put it back on your hand, and then I weave in the ends. And then lastly, we're going to do the thumb the exact same way as we did the right hand. Put your mitten inside out, put the thumb into your thumb hole. The thumb is right side out. And then you're going to take the tail ends of your thumb and use it to whip stitch it all the way around. Knot it, weave in your ends, and cut off any excess, and then you can hide the tails in between the two layers. So now we have a left hand and a right-handed mitten with the flip top or the convertible mittens to be able to make them fingerless. And here they are. So I really hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and having a couple ways of being able to make mittens, and also a few different options for your thumb, being able to either crochet it or to use a 22 needle circular knitting machine. Thank you everybody so much for all the likes, the follows, and I also appreciate all of your comments and questions. Thank you so much, and happy crafting.